Hey folks, Nick here for Board Game Brawl, and you know, I really like giving you backstories for board games that are really convoluted and hard to tell, and I've got a doozy for you today. Today we're taking a look at Romance of the Nine Empires from AEG. And, well, okay, let me first say that AEG has been on kind of a roll with me lately. I've been a huge fan of a lot of their micro card games and some of their bigger games like Trains Somewhere Over Here. I really, really like that. I'm really looking forward to playing some of their other big board games in their Tempest line. And they've got some stuff on the horizon that looks pretty A-OK. So, big fan of AEG, very, very excited for this game, Romance of the Nine Empires, even though it's got a very, very crazy backstory as to how it actually came to be in existence. So, there was this movie called Gamers, The Hands of Fate. I guess it's a series of movies. I've never watched any of them. I have no interest in them whatsoever. But anyways, in that movie, it's a fictitious movie about a group of gamers who play collectible card games, and they all go to this big convention to have a tournament where they're playing this game, Romance of the Nine Empires, which is a fake, there's a fake world and universe of this game. This game never existed in real life, even though the box for this says it's the 15th anniversary edition with all the world champion decks. That's all fake and fictitious. It was just in the movie. But the real company, AEG, was the fictitious producer of this game, and as part of like the Kickstarter or whatever to actually fund this movie, AEG agreed to actually make the game real in the real world and make the game into a real boy. They did that by actually using an old game system that they had in their library. It was an offshoot of the Legend of the Five Rings collectible card game called Burning Sands. So it's the same basic game system with some changes, and with this fictitious universe pasted onto it the universe is called Counter May. It's a very weird fantasy world where it's like all the typical fantasy tropes, but then there's extra dimensional portals, so there's spaceships and high-tech weaponry and World War II soldiers, and I don't know, I told you it'd be convoluted, didn't I? But what it basically comes down to is that this is a living card game-ish type of game. There's 5 different decks in this box, each representing a different faction. There's a big old stack of cards that you're going to use to customize those decks if you want to. In there, I think there's a vague promise of more expansions to come. So all of that is pretty interesting and weird and such, but it doesn't really have anything to do with the gameplay, does it? And I assure you that this is a very real game. It's not just a fake product endorsement. So we're going to take an overview of the game. I'll show you all the little bits and pieces as much as I can because it's a very complex game. And then we're going to come back and I'll tell you what I really think about it. Alright folks, I'm not going to go over every single rule of Romance of the Nine Empires, but I will show you a little bit about the game to let you know whether or not this is for you. So, there are 5 decks in this game that the players can play with, and each one corresponds to a different faction in the world of Countermay. So the one I have laid out here for our overview is the Protectorate of Malchior. So every faction has a card like this, which has basically your starting stats. Then we have a deck for the Ord, the Kingdom of Holden, the Dread Army of Ikasa. Boy, I wonder what their theme is. And the Displaced, who are kind of like in the weird world of Countermay. These are the people from the alternate dimensions, like the World War II soldiers and such. Now, the game also comes with a very large stack of cards that are strictly for the purpose of deck building. So these are not specific to any particular faction. And once you've played the game for a little bit, you can take these cards and take cards out of the existing decks, replace them with some of these, build them out, and so on and so forth. Now, as far as other stuff that comes with the game, you have little counters. This one, the Ordained token, is basically the first player token. There's not really turns in this game, but there are people go first during the phases, so whoever has the Ordained marker is going to take the first action in those instances. You have all kinds of little chits that are going to be used as reminders, sort of similar to Sentinels of the Multiverse, about different effects and conditions. This reminds that a character has become undead, and this one reminds that someone has -1 will, and so on and so forth. And the only other real type of token in this game are the food tokens, which are going to go out on your strongholds. So that's basically everything that's in the box, so let's take a look at all the cards in depth. So I mentioned before that there are 5 different factions, and whenever someone picks a faction deck, they're going to take their faction card, and this is basically going to tell you exactly who you are, in case you forget, and all of your little starting stats. Now, this number up in the corner is your stronghold total, and the number of strongholds you can have in play is sort of limited by this. Basically, every stronghold is going to have a number in the same kind of border here, and as long as your strongholds don't exceed that number, you can have that many in play when you start the game. Now, this little number underneath that with a cross behind it is your starting renown or fame. The words are kind of used interchangeably in the book, but if you're going for a popular victory, that number is going to be important. That's your name there. Now, whenever a card says bows in this, since apparently Wizards of the Coast trademarked the word tapped, or so the legend goes, this essentially means turning the card sideways. Whenever a card bows, the card basically uses whatever ability happens when it becomes bowed, and then no other special ability of the card is able to be used until the card unbows at the beginning of the next turn. And then every faction will have different abilities. So, for instance, the Ord's here says your castles have +1 might against raids, which is pretty useful. And then some abilities are only useful during certain phases of the game. So during the summer phase, the Ord can bow this card and ignore the food costs of the next hero, item, property, or spell card that they play. Now, down here at the bottom is a fate number. Now, the fate number is going to be very important during some of the battle phases because other cards that you may have in your hand, you can go ahead and discard for this fate number and get bonuses. We'll get into that a little more later. Now, some of the other kind of cards that you're going to run into in the deck. So I mentioned strongholds before. You'll start with a number of these in play as long as, like I said, as long as that number doesn't exceed your stronghold cost on your faction card, you're okay. So you see that for this one here, the Wizard's Tower, it's a 4, so you need to keep that in mind. Now, the number up in the top corner is actually the tower's, the stronghold's might. What that essentially is the stronghold's health points. If an attack ever gets through to one of your strongholds, the Wizard's Tower can only take 1 hit and then it's gone. And in fact, in this set, there is no stronghold with more than 1 might. The number underneath is the amount of food that this comes into play with. I mentioned that there are these little food tokens. So when you start play with the Wizard's Tower in play, you're going to put 5 food tokens on it right away. And unless something else is going to put, some other special ability is going to put food there, that's a finite amount. Now, there are a lot of keywords in this game, so Epic could be very important depending on what ability you're trying to use. Now, all strongholds usually have an ability. For instance, this one says react, which you'll do in reaction to someone else's effect. After a wizard attaches a spell, bow this card to draw a card. So like I said, when bow means to turn sideways, not tapping, never tapping, just turning sideways, and you'll be able to draw a card when a wizard attaches a spell. Other types of cards in the game. You have properties. Now, everyone's going to start off with the Mott and Bailey in play. This is like a basic property. Properties are basically just areas that are not quite strongholds, and they're basically going to be used as like lands in Magic. If I want to keep comparing this game to Magic, you'll basically bow it for resources. So just to go back to the example that I had in the Bazaar, it costs 2 gold to put into play and 1 food, and it bows for 2 gold. So there is no token for gold. Gold is kind of like a immaterial resource. You'll just bow properties and such to get gold, and you must spend it before the end of your phase. So this bows for 2 gold, or it bows for 3 gold if you are the Ordained, which is the first player. And there's a lot of different kind of properties, and they all do different things. There are items, which have different keywords as well. This one says it's specific to the Ord, and it's unique, and it is a weapon. Unique means you can only have 1 in play on your side. And yes, I know that looks like a giant science fiction space cruiser, and we've been looking at nothing but castles and strongholds and such, but just try to get over that. So up here at the top, we have different kinds of bonuses that are going to be given whenever a different hero equips this weapon. So the top one is going to be the strength number, which is, so the hero is just going to get a boost. The bottom number right underneath that is the will bonus. Strength is going to matter specifically during combat as far as dealing damage and being able to take damage. Will is going to be used for certain other aspects, especially as far as keeping your heroes in your army, and we'll get to that in a little bit. And they all have special abilities as well. I'm not going to get into all that. And like I said, there is a fate bonus down here that's going to determine how much of a bonus you can get for discarding this card during combat. And real quick, other types of units you might come across, or other types of cards. These types of cards with red borders, and some of them also have different colored borders, are sort of like instant cards. You'll use them whenever applicable, like this one says during the summer phase. And it may also break it down further as to when exactly you can use it. And it also has a fate bonus as well. Here's an example of a hero, Torin Quickhand. There's a static strength bonus that he starts with, and there's his will. And then underneath that, you have his glory, which is going to be used if you're going on quests. The cost, the gold and food cost to bring this hero into play. And all the different keywords. Ord, Quester, Wizard, Gnome, Raid +1. You're going to be referring to the rulebook a lot to remember what all these different keywords mean. And you see that he has a special ability when he goes on a raid, and a fate cost as well. And the last card I'll show you for right now is Cohorts. And Cohorts basically attach to heroes. They don't necessarily add their strength, but they can give them special bonuses. But essentially they have the same type of strength rating, cost, and fate points as regular heroes. So how does the game actually play? Alright, so at the start of the game, you're going to lay out your faction cards. You're going to pull your strongholds out of your deck, and of course that the number cannot exceed the castle cost on your stronghold card. Or on your faction card, and you're also going to have your Mott and Bailey, which starts in play for free. You'll decide who's going to be the Ordained first, and of course you'll shuffle up your deck. Now, you're going to draw a number of cards equal to 4 plus the number of strongholds you have in play. So of course, when you're making your own decks after this, that number could be variable. You get to take a mulligan if you have less than 2 properties in your hands. Because properties are basically the resource of the game, sort of like, again, like in Magic, if you don't have lands, you can't really do anything, so you're allowed to take a free mulligan. So let's assume that I'm the Ordained first. Basically, this game is broken down into phases. There's no real turns here. There are just phases in which one player acts first, and you basically go back and forth. Now, the spring phase is very easy. Let's say that I had cards that were bowed from the previous round. Then I would just straighten, quote-unquote, all of those untap, is what I meant to say, all of those properties or whatever they are. Multiple things can be properties. Oh, and I should also mention that, of course, you're going to put starting food out on all of your strongholds equal to whatever the food cost is there. So the spring phase is very easy, and also there could be cards that say only usable during spring phase. You would do those now as well, or spring phase effects, I should say. Then you're going to go to the summer phase. And the summer phase is basically where you're going to be bringing cards into play. You can bring heroes, properties, cohorts, items, quests, any of that, and spells, any of that kind of stuff into play. And the way that it works in this game is you're going to do it in turns. So let's say that, what can I actually bring into play now? I can bring out this property. So I'm going to play this property, and properties come into play bowed, so you can't use them right away. And this one here, the Corrupted Mind, costs me 2 food. So I have to get rid of 2 food, so I'll take them sort of evenly from a couple of mine that have 5 food, put them over into the stock, and there they go. Now, I've played something. Now it's my opponent's turn to play something. And that's basically how this is going to go. We're going to take turns, like let's say I might want to play a hero, and then my opponent will go and play something, and heroes come into play unbowed, but you're going to keep going until you don't have any more cards that you want to put down. Now, if you don't want to take any other action during the summer phase, you can pass, but then your opponent still gets to go. And basically, the phases keep going until both players pass and don't want to do anything. Of course, even if you pass and then your opponent passes, you can still just change your mind and say, oh wait, I want to do something after all. Now, the one other important thing about the summer phase is that both players have one and only one attack that they can perform. Now, attack's a little complicated, so let's get into that in a moment. Alright, so let's do a very brief, very light demonstration of a battle during the summer phase. Now, the first thing you're going to do is someone has to declare an attack. Basically, they're going to use their action, which they can only do once per summer phase, to declare an attack. So let's say in this case that the good Sir General Hain here is going to be dealing the pain or dealing the Hain to the other player. So now after someone declares an attack, both sides get to call for allies. Now that's assuming that this is a multiplayer game. We're just going to do this 2-player. But if it were a multiplayer game, you can call for allies and call for assistance if you so desire. Now, first the attacker is going to assign units, and what it means by assign units is that you could possibly attack with more than one hero and cohorts. Now, if you do that, you can choose to split them, and basically why that is important is because you're not just attacking the player, you're attacking their different strongholds and castles. You're going to choose one in particular per unit that you have to go out and attack one of those. You can have a unit comprising just one hero, you can have several heroes in cohorts in a unit, doesn't matter, and you can split them however you want to go and attack. Now let's just assume that General Hain here is attacking one of the defender's strongholds or castles. I always get the terminology mixed up. Then the defender is going to have to assign their units. So if the defender had multiple units out here, they assign them to each one that they're trying to defend against. You don't have to defend if you don't want to, but we'll get back to that in a moment. And then after that, if there are multiple battles in the front, the attacker is going to choose which one of those to resolve. And after that, it goes straight back into phases where each player is going to take a turn, starting with the attacker and going back and forth, playing abilities and using cards. You can use an ability that a card has in battle. You can use the only main rule for stuff that you're using in a battle is that it has to be an ability that has to do with the battle. Even if it says you can use it in the summer phase, if it's just an ability that lets you grab food off an opponent's castle, you can't play it because it has nothing to do with the battle. Otherwise, you're good to go. So you could also use an ability like Blitzkrieg here, which basically you play after the attacker chooses a battle, and the attacker performs the first action in the current battle instead of the defender. I'm sorry, it's usually the defender that gets the first action. And so you're going to keep going back and forth like that until both players don't want to play any more abilities and pass. However, pretty much the most important action that you can take during this phase is engaging for damage. Now, when you engage a unit for damage, you're going to bow one or more cards in the unit that's currently involved, and you're going to try to deal damage to the opponent. Now, in this case, you're trying to deal damage to whatever castle you're targeting, and your opponent just has to try and respond by defending it some way, shape, or form. So General Hain here has a whopping 7 damage. This is his strength rating, and this is how much damage he's dealing. He basically this doesn't really affect the battle at all, but he has all kinds of other stuff here, like brutal, and we're not going to worry about that right this moment. And so the defender has to account for that damage some way or somehow. Now, she can just choose to ignore trying to defend it at all, and if they do so, then that damage is going to go straight to the defender's castle. And the defender either just loses their castle altogether, but they'll first have to take food tokens off. Basically, they have to find a way to soak up all 7 of that damage. So she could choose to sacrifice this hero, in which case she only has a strength of 4, so she's only going to be able to absorb 4 of that damage. But if any of that damage would go through, assume it's like Magic rules where a creature always has trample, she still has to deal with that damage. And even if it was less damage than her current strength, any damage that the defender's unit takes automatically dies. Now, if the situation were reversed and the defender was engaging for damage against the hero, the attacker, and only the attacker, has the opportunity to declare one or more of their units immune if their strength total is higher than the damage that the defender is dealing. I know it's a little confusing, but regardless, any amount of damage is enough to bury the defender's unit, or even the attacker's unit if they're not immune. And they have to absorb that damage. If they don't, either this and or their castle is gone, along with any cohorts they may choose to use. Now, you do have the option to try and discard a card from your hand to get a bonus to that absorption equal to the fate number here. So you can only do one card that way, but it could help in either saving your castle, saving one of your heroes, and so on and so forth. But assuming that you resolve the battle one way or the other, all the damage is absorbed either by the heroes or the cohorts or the castle, then the battle is over and you move on to the next battle, or you go out of the battle phase altogether. I should mention that before any of that happens, it's also possible to just retreat from battle if you decide that you're going back and forth through the phase and it's not going to work out for you. Whew. Okay, so that is just a very, very, very quick and cursory glance at the battle phase. Let's get out of this and go and see what happens in the autumn phase. Alright, so the autumn phase is all about raiding. Well, of course, if you have any autumn abilities, those will kick off as soon as the phase starts. But for the most part, this is all about each player having one chance to perform a raid. Now, most of the structure of this is similar to a battle, in which case you're going to have someone, the raider, who's going against the defender, and you're going to break off into different units if you have the units available. Only one unit can go after one castle, and then the defender has to defend against one of those. But there's one important difference here. First off, in a raid, you're not actually trying to destroy your opponent's strongholds. You're trying to steal food from those strongholds. Remember those little food tokens that are on each one of the castles and strongholds. So you're trying to actually steal it that way. Also, in order to perform a raid, first off, you must have cards in hand. If you don't have any cards in hand, you can't even do this action. And you must put one card down on each of the units. So the attacker has to put a card down, face down, and the defender has to put a card face down on anyone that he's actually defending against the raid with. Everything on this card is completely useless to the raid except for the fate value. That is the important number. The higher, the better for both sides. So once everyone has assigned units, essentially you are going to, again, there's going to be a back and forth. If you have cards you want to play from your hand that are relevant to the battle, if there's other abilities from the units that are involved in the raid, then you may use them back and forth, starting with the defender and so on until both players pass. And then you're going to resolve the raid. And what you're going to do is you're going to flip both cards over and compare who has the higher fate number. In this case, poor General Hain is really great at combat, but doesn't do so well in defending against a raid. And Kao Kava, or whatever, has a really high stealth value here from his fate card. And in fact, he has another special ability here. One of his keywords is raid +1, so he really was able to raid. And because he successfully beat the number to raid, he's going to be able to steal a food from that castle. But he also has a special ability of carry +1, which means that he brings back an extra food. And for right now, that food actually goes onto his card, and you'll have a chance to get that off of him later. And then you're going to resolve any other raids, and so on and so forth. And that's basically how the entire autumn phase works. Now let's go to the winter phase. So the winter phase is all about cleanup. It's where you're going to take food from your heroes and put them on your castles, redistribute those food tokens however you wish on your castles, draw 4 cards, and pass the ordained marker one seat to the left. Also, you have to maintain your hand size, which is going to be the number of strongholds you have, +4. But there's also a couple of little important things in the winter phase. Basically, you're going to determine if players have won the game or if they're just eliminated from the game. I haven't actually mentioned how you win this game yet because, like everything else in this game, is kind of complicated, and there are 3 different ways to win. First is to have a dominance victory, which is being the only player to have castles with food at the end of a turn. Basically, all the people flock to you because you have all the food, yada, yada, yada. Now, you could also have a conquest victory, which is just destroy the last castle other than any of your own in the game. Wipe out all your opponent's castles, boom, you're the only one left standing. You are the true and rightful heir to whatever this crazy place is. But you're probably wondering why I have these 2 cards out here. Well, there's one more important thing I have to explain, and that's questing, because there is another way to win this game, and that is a popular victory. If you have 50 renown and at least 3 quests in play at the end of a turn, you win the game. Basically, all the people acknowledge that you are the ultimate fantasy, sci-fi, weird melding warrior, and they all flock to you. But how do you actually do quests? Well, let's go back to the summer phase. I mentioned earlier, just in passing, that one of the things you can play during that turn are quest cards. Now, quest cards all kind of look the same. They all have a little renown bonus up in the top corner, which looks very similar to the cross that is on your stronghold card. They have a little symbol for glory here, which is their glory cost, how much glory you must spend. And then they have some sort of condition here that must be met. So in the case of the Rescue the Hostage quest, you can only complete it if you raid food from an enemy's castle and lose no food to raids during the autumn phase. Of course, like every other card, it also has a fate value as well. So how do you actually get this into play? During the summer phase, one of the cards that you can play is the quest, and how you're going to do that is, much like bowing cards for gold, you're going to bow heroes who have glory total at least equal to the glory cost of that quest. So in this case, hey, she's on the box. Anyways, Myriad Buxtehude, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, but who's going to prove me wrong? She's got a glory of 5, so that's very simple. All you have to do is bow her. You can bring this quest into play. Now, as soon as you bring a quest into play, you're immediately going to gain that renown up in the top corner. And remember, 50 renown will win you the game. But this quest is not actually complete. Now, once you have actually met the condition for completing the quest, you'll have yet another card that looks almost exactly the same as that card, but it's just a token that you're going to put over this. And basically, now it counts as a completed quest. You can only have one particular type of quest in play at a time, by the way. These are considered unique for you. And from now on, you can bow this for a special ability. During a raid, you can bow this card. Target hero gains an additional carry of +1. And oh, look, you get even more renown to possibly win you the game. So that's how questing works. Remember that you have to have 3 quests in play and 50 renown in order to totally win. Or you can wipe out all your enemies' castles, or you can be the only one with food left. Lots of ways to win, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of steps and phases and keywords in the game of Romance of the Nine Empires. Alright, so did you find that overview and my rules explanation kind of hard to follow and a little bit confusing? Welcome to my nightmare, pal. Because I'm going to tell you something. This is one of the most weirdest, confusing games I've ever played. And full disclaimer here, I've played this game about 6 times. I went through all the different little setup games that the rulebook tells you to go through to help you learn the game. And then I did 1 or 2 other games for real to do all the rules, all encompassing me and my opponent's choice of factions. I didn't actually play multiplayer because, well, okay, I'd had enough at that point. But so I played this game enough, and okay, I find myself to be a fairly intelligent person. Maybe you think I'm an idiot, especially when you hear the end of this review. But okay, that's fine. I will tell you this for sure. I played this game with some very, very smart people. People that play games like Agricola, and they've planned out every single move from beginning to end, and they've already crushed you in their minds. People like that who are used to very heavy games, heavy Euro games, very good at figuring things out. And even those people, at multiple times throughout the multiple playthroughs we did, at some point were going, what? That doesn't make any sense. Why? Why would I bury a hero that didn't take enough damage to kill it? And so many things in this game are just confusing. And it's not helped by the fact that it's just hard to keep track of what to do in this game. Now, at first blush, the idea that there's no real turns in this game, that everything is in phases that players go back and forth, is kind of cool, and it's very different than a lot of other collectible card games and living card games, and I was on board with that idea at first. The problem is that the game is just too complex for that. You're going back and forth, you're having to keep track of different rules every single time. You can do some things on a limited amount of times, but you can only attack once per turn. You have to keep track of who's actually done that. You're going from one phase and there's like sub phases because attacking is a whole other phase that's got completely different rules than the rest of the summer phase. And then you get to the autumn phase and then there's raiding, which is completely different than everything else. And then questing works completely different. And having 3 victory conditions is pretty cool. And I like that. I like games with multiple paths to victory, especially when they're drastically different like this. But it just adds too much. There's just too much here to keep track of. And because players are going back and forth and effectively just countering each other back and forth, it makes the game drag on. Because you may want to have your guy go, your deck, your faction, go all out on questing and get a popular victory by getting 50 renown and having quests in play. Okay, great. I actually like that idea a lot. I wanted to do that. If you focus enough on that to do that quickly, you're going to get killed. You're going to lose either all your food from raiding, or you're going to just or more likely you're just going to lose your strongholds or castles. That was the one way everyone tried to play, was attacking, and this game sort of lends itself to that, or raiding as a secondary. And so in order to keep yourself alive and able to quest, you have to defend yourself. But if you're using your heroes to defend yourself, and of course your heroes die regardless of how much damage they take, even if they absorb all the damage, even if they have strength left over, they're going to die, which doesn't make any sense. Let me calm down. Here's the thing about this game. I don't think it's I don't think it's a bad game. I think there's going to be people that absolutely adore this game. And it's going to be people that are used to playing collectible card games, people that are used to playing living card games, and are looking for another step up in complexity or just something that's new and different. And I don't know, maybe I'm dumb. Maybe this game isn't all that complex, and I just got the feeling the entire time I was playing it, in every game that I played, that I was missing something. That something just wasn't there, that something wasn't right, that we weren't doing something right, that just something wasn't there. And then when we would go to check the rule book, which was often, hey, guess what? We weren't doing anything wrong. We weren't missing anything. The rules are really that weird. It really does work that way. So, I don't know. The games were too long for what it is. If this is really supposed to be like collectible card game or living card game, a half hour is a very reasonable amount of time for a match, but we found matches going on for an hour, and that's only 2 players. Again, I didn't even want to bother with multiplayer because I was afraid of how long that would take, and I didn't want to inflict this game on that many people. I can't recommend this game. To me, it was just a very bad experience, a very frustrating experience, and again, this was not like a review copy sent to me. I was very excited for this game. I liked the idea of the backstory. It was very weird, but I thought it was very funny and kind of neat. I liked the world. I was excited to get into having such good luck with games like Netrunner and to a degree Game of Thrones. I was excited for something a little bit different. It didn't deliver. It definitely delivered something different, but not something good. I can't recommend this in good faith to anyone unless you just are in love with the theme for what it is, in love with the movie that it came from, or you just want a different type of collectible card game. That's the only way I would possibly recommend this. There's just too many confusing rules. It's too uneven, too unbalanced, too long. What can I say? I think I've said enough. So that's Remains of the Nine Empires from AEG. Better luck next time. My name is Nick. This is Board Game Brawl, reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.